Thank you so much for taking the time to join today for today's discussion on what we're calling, if you like it, buy it. A discussion about the current state of the art market, the resilience of art fairs, and how the gallery sector is surviving and in some cases thriving in this environment. So the structure of today's discussion is really intended to be candid and conversational. So I encourage you to drop questions into the Q&A box. I'll do my very best to make sure that the questions are answered. If we do miss anything, please know that we will follow up with you by email shortly after the webinar. So in case that we have not met before, I'm Noah Kupferman, the Director of Business Development here at Athena Art Finance at Yield Street. And it's my pleasure to host this webinar and have this discussion today with Tony Karman, the President and Director of EXPO Chicago, one of the preeminent art fairs of contemporary and modern art over many years, and which actually just concluded over the weekend, the 2021 edition in virtual format, which I'm looking forward to hearing what Tony has to say about that and give us sort of a rundown. But I want to give you sort of a little bit of context about our discussion this morning. So after the past several webinars, we focused mainly on the public auction side of the market, primarily the developments of the large auction houses, Christie's, Sotheby's, Phillips. But the public side of the market is really only half of the story. The other half, of course, is the private sale side of the market, specifically art fairs and the galleries that participate in them. And that's what we're focused on mainly today. Of course, the backdrop to everything that has transpired over this past year has been COVID-19 related. And in the wake of COVID, the art market, just like pretty much any other market in the world, has struggled. The 2020 global sales of art and antiques were down more than 22%, auction sales down 30%, gallery sales down 20%, and of the 365 art fairs that were scheduled to take place in 2020, more than 60% were just flat out canceled due to COVID. So it's no exaggeration to say that really over the last 20 years, art fairs have become a central part of the gallery sector business model, providing not only a venue for growing share of sales, but also a vital, crucial point of outreach for new and existing collectors. And so the world, as the world has gone digital through this pandemic, many art businesses have had to as well. And many art businesses have partnered with external platforms, such as Artsy. By way of example, in 2020, Artsy provided the digital platform for 70 art fairs. And an interesting data that was made public by Artsy, 90% of online inquiries that were made at art fairs were on artworks disclosed with openly disclosed pricing, underlining the importance and the demand for price transparency in our market. And so looking ahead, as we finally head out of the pandemic, fingers crossed, we can expect to see a significant surge in post-lockdown art business activity, likely followed by a bit of leveling off to something akin to perhaps a new normal. But the innovations that have been developed during the pandemic, live stream sales, a rolling battery of online offering, market collaboration, and growing market transparency are likely here to stay. And so, Tony Karman, welcome to the Yield. We're delighted to have you. Yeah. So EXPO Chicago just wrapped up its 9th edition on Sunday, mounting what was a virtual, an online viewing room fair. Would love to hear about how, from your perspective, everything went down.
You know, it sounds, if I can begin with saying that it went well, that's in the context of the many challenges that we've faced over the last year, having to adjust to a new reality, having to go through 2 postponements. For you, we've had a great relationship with Athena Art Finance for the last several years. Very proud of that relationship and grateful for the investments that you've made with us. when the pandemic began, we very quickly had to adjust, as everyone has had to. We were just beginning our application cycle and a selection committee when we postponed what was our September 2020 fair to April of 21, and then began to assess all of the internal programming that we had in place. And we, like the galleries, were open and look to embracing the digital format. I would venture to say, just like the gallery sector, we did not have a plan for an online viewing room, the acronym OVR. We did not think that we were going to be doing that. And it was nice that we developed a partnership with an independent provider that allowed us to have that in our pocket to launch what was our first endeavor back in September of 2020 called Exhibition Weekend. This recent edition was much more full. It worked with galleries, a broader selection of galleries. Back in September, our online was strictly Chicago galleries present and programming to the world. This was open to a broader constituency of exhibitors that work with us. And so, this last online edition taught us a whole nother level of lessons. And I think that you and I both know, both in past conversations and current, the art world had to embrace the digital format very quickly, and lessons are still to be learned. And so did collectors have to adjust to what it meant or what it means to look at artwork digitally. But these editions have proved to be a wonderful way to keep those connections going. And, sales were made. We had several hundred thousands of page views. We're still getting a number of the metrics in as it relates to other metrics that we would never have calculated in a regular art fair. So it's forced our company to think a little bit more strategically on how we use a digital platform. And I know this was a long-winded answer to a first question. It also allows us to be innovative and think how we're going to use this platform as a supplement to our in-person experience, which to many of your viewers, they may not know. It actually just so happened that today we announced that the next in-person EXPO Chicago will be April 7 to 10 in 2022. So, but the digital OVR does not stop. We will continue to refine it and use it as in support of our exhibitors, and that's important. So I'm sorry, it was a long first answer.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's a great, not long-winded at all, very nicely detailed, I would say. And congratulations on that announcement. I know that a lot of thought and has gone into and trying to figure out when it's safe to go outside again, I suppose, one way to put it. And so now, about a year from now, we'll be talking about the same thing. How did the fair go? But we'll be talking about it in a different way because it will have been live. So that's wonderful, wonderful news. Yeah, fingers crossed. Absolutely.
I must do that.
So, one thing that's interesting is to think about in the wake of COVID, and now that with your announcement going live in a year's time, over the past number of years with this incredible, one could call it the juggernaut of the growth of art fairs, it really seemed like the adage was bigger is better, and more is better. And that the proof in there is basically to say that, well, gosh, there were 365 fairs last year. 60%, more than 60% had to be canceled because of the pandemic. But Frieze has taken an interesting move. They're going live at the Shed here in New York City, and it'll be a more intimate affair out of necessity. So I just wonder if that is, of course, bigger is nice. More people can go see, but is that necessarily better? And sort of from your perspective, thinking about, thinking about the viewing experience, thinking about the fair experience, and fingers crossed the pandemic will be a thing of the past, right? So Anyway, if what your thoughts are on that.
For context, and many have heard me say this in the past, it just for the sake of context, Chicago hosted an international art fair for 20 years before there was another fair in North and South America. And so there's a great legacy and tradition of a fair in Chicago. And that tradition at Navy Pier also has allowed us, going into our 9th edition, to stay within the environs. I mean, we are the size of the fantastic hall, 170,000 square foot venue that never allowed us to go bigger anyway. I would venture to say at 130 galleries, typically, which is what we were, we were relatively boutique compared to many of the major fairs pre-pandemic. We'll see what we need to adjust to and what we actually present in April of 2022. We obviously didn't expect to cancel April of 2021, and I was anticipating, a new floor plan with adjusted, areas and not being able to be bigger, and embracing that, because I think that bigger is not necessarily better, although there's an important energy that happens that at an art fair. That's what those convening moments are so critical and important. And so, in some instances, it really matters about the, who's participating and that moment. But obviously the fairs are not going away. And I think the industry is anxious to re-enter cautiously into what is a renewed cycle, because, after all, galleries, and we can talk about this further, galleries have not just adjusted to the digital or virtual format, they've also adjusted, like my business, my company, adjusted to this last year and the impact on staffing, costs, expenses. And so, I think everyone's anxious to get out when it's safe to get out. But I also think there's going to be some caution as it relates to how much can how many fairs can these galleries do, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's one of the reasons why we wanted to put the flag in the sand for April of 2022 to allow this cycle to reopen again and prepare.
Sure. Great. Yeah, interesting. So, I mean, you mentioned something that interesting regarding sort of the struggle that all businesses have had, large or small, over this past year, and sort of this idea of we've heard a lot about. There's been a lot of analysis and discussion about the PPP loan, and really the positive effects that has had across industries, industry-wide, economy-wide. Is that something that you've seen with respect to galleries, with respect to art fairs? Has that hit the art market as well?
No question. In fact, I'm a perfect example and would want to say and justify the importance of what those loans have allowed my company and the galleries. Speaking for myself, having been able to receive, it's been able to maintain the company, to prepare us for when we can actually launch. But more importantly, when we launch, we are a jobs generator. We're not just the hospitality sector, but just the impact on the local cultural community, as well as jobs as it relates to the structural build of a fair, et cetera. So the good news is, without those PPP loans, we may have, or maybe the bad news would have been, we may not have been able to survive this last year. And I know that is definitely the same for many of the galleries that I've spoken to, large and small. That loan allowed them to both keep staff like us, but also adjust their expenses over this last year to prepare for what will be the reopening. But the interesting thing about galleries, because I've spoken with many of the dealers, the good news is they've been able to operate and have been quite surprised at how well they've been able to operate over these last few months, because they could still communicate to their collectors, and they could also, in timed entry, still invite those that wanted to see exhibitions into those spaces. I'm in a little bit different, and other fairs in a little different situation, where it has to get to phase 5 and have to, be at a place where, a large number of individuals can convene. But I think galleries have seen successes because they've been able to adjust to this time. Sorry.
Yeah, I know. Thank you. It's interesting. I mean, because on the face of it, I think what a lot of people, perhaps from the outside looking in, or maybe even sometimes from the inside looking out, an eyebrow or two might be raised at the suggestion of saying, wait a second, the art market, PPP, is this sort of like, is there a disconnect here? Because we're talking about many of the galleries selling works of art for quite a bit of money. And so can you sort of connect that together and see how, what's behind that?
Well, I mean, I think that, sometimes everyone looks to the large numbers, large sales in auctions, or large sales at fairs, or large sales as the norm. I think we all realize that there's a significant amount of transactions taking place at a very small amount, or that is not the multi-million-dollar works. And for galleries, and for most of this industry, those smaller amount sales are as important, and I know that can sound absurd, as important as a large sale, because it's that continuous transaction. It's connecting to collectors. It's building new collectors. So, for a large part of the gallery community, I think we have to recognize that, the sweet spot isn't million plus. The sweet spot might even be 10,000 and less, in some ways. I mean, I think, of course, there's a wide range in there, but for the galleries that, every transaction, whether it's a $5,000 sale or $1 million sale, has been critical to keeping the machine oiled over this last year. And I think all of us are pleasantly surprised at the fact that of the resilience of the art market, and the resilience of the exhibitors and the dealers, and the collectors to be there for them over this last year. And it is, I think that we were anticipating back in April of 2020, listening to a number of articles or a number of prognosticators, really fearing that we would see 40-50% of the galleries going out of business. I think when fall 2020 hit, for the most part, I know this is over contextualizing. I think a lot of the galleries probably pinched themselves and said, wait a minute, we're doing okay. And why? Collectors stayed with them. They were aggressively active in the virtual and digital market. And more importantly, they too adjusted their expenses. They weren't participating in 10 fairs or traveling. And so all of us, and many of your listeners know, all of us have had to make adjustments to what is the sheer output, what is the expenses of our companies.
Sure. No, interesting. I mean, that's why I'm so pleased that you joined us today, because in part because so much of what we have discussed in the past on the yield and just the art market in general does focus on these evening sale, Christie's, Sotheby's, Phillips kind of tens of multis of millions of dollars kinds of sales, and that's exciting and lovely. But it strikes me that so much of the art market actually is almost like you can call it a mom and pop kind of industry, which is so counter. I don't know if it's counterintuitive or just counter what many people's perceptions of the art market actually is, right? Which is really.
I mean, I think that using the phrase mom and pop shouldn't sound pejorative. And I know you don't mean it that way. And I say the same thing. But I think it's important for everyone to recognize that there's, in the grand scheme of corporate, let's call it corporate global corporate world, many of these galleries are operating with 2 or 3 staff, and the major galleries may only be operating, well, I'm sure there's been adjustments, so I don't want to be held accountable to exact numbers, but maybe 200 staff. But when you look at that, you have to recognize that this isn't Apple or Amazon. So the major anchors, the major market makers of the global art market still are relatively small number of employee size companies, although their transactions could be large. And this pandemic hit them just like a major corporation. And it's sort of relative up that scale. The hit to that mom and pop small gallery that might have 1 or 2 employees and hopefully a good accountant is equal to a major anchor market making gallery. The relative hit was the same.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, no, it's interesting you bring up Amazon. And often I'll make the comparison. People ask about size of the art market and, depth and breadth of the market and this kind of thing. And, the total annual sales last year made in the art market, total annual global sale is not even 1/3 of the net worth of the primary shareholder at Amazon. so there you go.
Thanks for that perspective.
Yeah, you're welcome. You touched on it a little bit before, but I think it's an important issue and interesting to hear your perspective. I mean, if you think back to a year ago, gosh, a year ago today, a year ago within this time period, many of us were thinking it looked like 2008 financial crisis all over again, and there was. And not sort of thinking so dramatically incorrectly, thinking this looks like it's going to be just a period of doom and gloom, and so it would seem like that didn't play out in the same kind of way. And so I think it's interesting to sort of hear your perspective a bit more on well, why is that? Pretty much everyone was predicting an end of the world scenario. And it didn't happen, thank God.
Yes, thank God. I don't know how, the crystal ball is still rather murky for the future. But the good news is that that crystal ball has proven so far to allow for us to see the resilience of the market. And I said that earlier, but I will say it again. It goes to show how important this marketplace is. Not just for a transaction for just a piece of artwork, but how important it is as it relates to the broader context and relationships, museums, institutions, nonprofits. And so I think that what we found here is there's a continual want and thank God need for individuals to want to live with art, be engaged in that social discourse that happens, whether they go to an exhibition, a museum, or an art fair, where they can connect and learn about that work, acquire that work. And I think that what's happened, outside of, as you mentioned, the global expansion to 365 art fairs, what's happened because of that is that marketplace has grown so large and the interest has grown, or the opportunities have grown larger with that it's that where we are today proves that really was the case, that it wasn't just, the collectors of yore in the 1980s where you probably, or 70s, where you probably could have, because there's a famous photograph in New York where like 100 collectors in a room, right? And that was the collecting universe, or
that's the market,
that's the marketplace. We know it's larger, and that's been proven now and supported by the resilience. And I think that, as I said, I use the phrase, many of the dealers have pinched themselves. I'm sure they have. So have we, actually, that we have a place where we can announce a future fair, or a hopeful future fair in April. And I think the dealers have found, in my conversations with many of the principals, that the collectors have remained engaged, and they actually embraced the digital format and probably bought more artwork through the digital format than they did at even art fairs, because they were home and they could explore, or they could explore in a different way what's out there. An anecdote, you know, I had a conversation with a collector that had a conversation recently about, did you collect off of OPR? And I'll be honest, they said, no, they didn't. However, what they did do is they explored galleries that they had no relationship with. They are now in discussion with several of those galleries to learn more about those artists. And they re-engaged a work of an artist with a gallery. I'm being so obtuse, sorry. It happened to be a gallery in New York. And they inquired about work that they looked at a couple of years ago because they saw it on the online, on EXPO Chicago online. So what they did is stayed engaged. And in their case, it may not have been a transaction on the online, but like an art fair, there's a long tail, and the connection is happening, and they used that time in their own home to go explore. That's the important, and I think that, back to the original question, I think that again, broad context, galleries have felt, have been incredibly pleased that discourse could have maintained and continue over this last time that we've been locked. Anyway, I hope that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. No, that's great. And really interesting and helpful to hear. And I guess we could say, well, that's time well spent. That particular individual spent his or her time. But I guess in a sense, not to. I don't know, was it Al Gore who said that he invented the internet, or who was it? But thanks to him or whoever, a group of people, because it's not for digital. Digital has been both a blessing and a curse. Without digital, that couldn't have happened, I think, right? I mean, really, that's been an incredible savior for the market in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that all of us recognize that seeing a piece of artwork through a PDF or online is definitely not the way to see and experience artwork. But as we have all refined what this discussion can be over the last 10 months, so have the galleries, so have the collectors, so have all of us. And I think that there's a little bit more willingness to allow that connection via a PDF or an image to actually still relate to something, to an acquisition or transaction. And I think some of it has to do with the trust of this experience now. However, my however in this is, all of us want to get back to that experience of going to a museum, going to an art fair, going to a gallery, speaking for this sector, and experience the work in person, because after all, that's the way this should be happening. And then, you know, I think that the other important thing, and this goes beyond just the art market and art fairs, I think we as humans also just yearn for the serendipity of that experience, going to a gallery and running into somebody, and that somebody conversation translates into information on a new artist, and so actually I will stay on for our marketplace. That is one of the things that we tried to do with EXPO Chicago Online, and create some through lines through curators or a dealer's choice to try to replicate the serendipity of an in-person experience. But, you know, there's nothing like that important part of what it means to be human and experiencing an event, and the tell of information that happens at an art fair.
Right. Right.
And I think that we'll all recognize, not just in the art world, but just in life, what it means to go to a restaurant and run into somebody again.
That'll be
Schedule a Zoom chat. Yeah.
Look forward to that for sure. Yeah, for sure. It really speaks to what you're saying. I think that there are certain things that digital can do really well, and there are other things that digital cannot do very well. And the criticism, it seems to me, part of the criticism that digital has taken on the chin is basically criticizing it for what it was never intended to do, which was connect us in person. And obviously that can't happen through digital, but the things that it can do, I just wonder, and I think a lot of us are wondering, scratching our heads, thinking, so going forward, how now is digital going to be a partner in our immediate viewing at an art fair or in a gallery? And I guess that's something that now you need to figure out over the next year, because you'll be having an in-person fair.
Yeah, but it speaks to the broader reach that we can all have. There's no question that, and I use this word successful not to spin, but there's no question that our experience with EXPO Chicago online was successful. In many ways, there were many transactions done, and I'm pleased for that, actually, unexpectedly pleased for those results. But we learned that we were able to speak to a broader audience without being in person. We were able to still program, which we're known for, an extraordinary amount of curatorial programming, as well as talks programs, and connect with our international global partners. So we were able to stay present. But going into going into in person, of course, we want to make sure people come to Chicago, not just stay in their home, but there's always going to be a certain audience that will not be able to travel to a fair. And that's where I think we will find, I hope, a sweet spot to use this tool to be current. So it's not just post-fair, but current during the fair in person, to supplement it in a way that for those that might not make the effort or might not be able to attend in person, to still have access to work. Because after all, we're in the service of the art, the exhibitors. And I say that, and I haven't said it yet, but the most important constituent for me are the exhibitors that have chosen to participate with their checkbook in the exposition that we're presenting. So everything that we do needs to be in absolute service of them, and hopefully present an exposition that allows them to see the successes that they expect. Now, we can't guarantee they're going to sell out their booth nor see everyone they want to see. And I've said this for years, I'm built to want everyone to sell out their booth and see everyone they want to see.
Sure.
And it, I would venture to say, even if they did that, I still would find a way to, or find a fault for what services we may have provided. But that's where this digital is going to have to continue to provide them success, and be embedded throughout the year to do that. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's great. Yeah, no, I look forward to, absolutely look forward to coming to Chicago, and I will be one of the people there in person. I hear that you Chicago folks feel that you may have a good piece of pizza, which coming from New York, I'm interested in exploring that. But we don't need to discuss that. What I'd like to do is to open it up to a few questions. So we have a few interesting questions that have come up in our chat that I'd like to focus on. Understanding that the final stats are still being gathered, but were there any noticeable sales trends from this year's fair? And what do you think such trends may say about where the market is headed over the next year or more?
Oh, it's a good question. If you're speaking about the online fair, or if the question was specific to EXPO Chicago online, again, I'm going to plead a little bit of perspective that we still need to gain. It's very interesting how we've learned to start to gauge success. In many ways, even in an in-person fair, we're not totally privy to all the transactions that take place. Many transactions happen at an in-person fair months afterwards. And, so it's not necessarily what is sold at a fair, although at a fair in person, I can actually do old school. I can be in touch with dealers, ask them how they're doing, get a gauge. I sold this, I might have sold this. I've got, we actually sold 10 pieces, or, in a way, that's the best metrics the way I would normally have worked. In this new iteration of an online art fair, what we do have a sense of is how many inquiries are made to the galleries. We have a sense of how many sold red dots, just like an art fair, are on. But I'm not privy, just like at a in-person fair, not privy to what that was sold at, what adjustments they made to price or not. And, we are still in a place where it's still opaque, because the inquiry, we may know that there was an inquiry for a work, but we don't know if that transacted. So as much as we have learned that there's more information to be gleaned from online, it's surprisingly similar to an in-person experience. Now, I don't want to. I also want to add, there is some new information for us. How many page views, how many what traffic per gallery, what kind of those kind of metrics, I think, will play a role in us shaping advertising outreach. And there may have been a second part of that question. I want to be mindful of that question. Was there something that I missed? Just so.
No, I think you hit it. I mean, what the question is trying to get at is, are there things in the data that we can, that have some sort of predictive power of where we think this might be going?
Yeah, I mean, we still don't. It's not that we have names of those transactions. After all that, I think it's important for, although all of us want more data, all of us want to refine, what we can capture. It still is a relationship that I think is important between the art dealer or the exhibitor and the collector and the transactor.
Sure.
We may know who was on the site, but we don't know necessarily. We didn't do commerce through the site. And that's one thing and I think that's really the differentiator. I am sure at some point, just like we've all embraced digital, that the exhibitors may feel a little bit more comfortable with that transaction. But we didn't go to that place where, we were allowing that transaction. Although, the platform that we used, a great platform called Hook, obviously they're exploring that. It's been a wonderful partnership with them. And, they, like any of the privately, the privately labeled on OVRs from some of the major fairs, I'm sure everyone's looking at the ability of incorporating that.
Yeah, which is interesting. I mean, really, it's sort of touching on this age-old description, or in some ways could be criticism of the art market, is this sort of transparency versus opacity kind of struggle, and digital certainly helps us with having a lot more data. Now we have to figure out what to do with the data and what it's telling us, right? Because we have to make sure we're reading it correctly. But so we have another question that I would love to toss your way, that's quite interesting. So you alluded to a future blend of in-person and digital sales. How do you think this will impact accessibility of the art market going forward?
If accessibility means availability of artwork, I think it will only increase that. There's choices made by any of the dealers on what fairs they're participating in, what locations, marketplace locations they want to try to penetrate, to use a business phrase. And in this, the same goes, I think, with the participation in online. What we found is, for many of the galleries participating in EXPO Chicago Online, it came at a time where it gave them a platform to showcase a work of an artist that they may not have had, that wasn't out there, or might have gotten cycled out of an exhibition because of the adjustments to the in-person. And it gave some of the galleries an opportunity to just give a little lift to some new opportunity to present new work. And I think that that's an interesting perspective that could be a supplement to future, because after all, an exhibitor for an art fair is making a determination of what they want to show. I mean, there's some exhibitors that will bring the smorgasbord of their program, but what has worked well, I think, surely at EXPO Chicago, are the exhibitors that look at it as an opportunity to present a thoughtful thematic themed presentation, which means they're putting a lot of choice or a lot of risk into one or two artists potentially,
Sure.
rather than 22 artists. The supplemental online, I think, would allow for both things to happen simultaneously. I think we'll see,
sure.
where an in-person presentation in an art fair may be supplemented with something additional online. And I think that that's where I'm more interested in finding that how this works simultaneously.
Okay, got it. Interesting. That's so interesting, seeing how we're in the midst of really figuring out. Right, it's changing, right, it's evolving right before our eyes. And Tony, you're on the front line, my friend. You're figuring it out, and it's great. And I thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
I'm honored to have the opportunity, and I think I, like you and all, sort of embrace, although this is maybe a tired phrase, embrace these challenges with huge willingness and to embrace the opportunities. And I think that they're, we would never have thought to be doing it online 10 months ago. And here we are with two of them under our belt in a way that has taught us a great deal. And I think that if, that has been what I think a hallmark of our company, being nimble, being able to innovate where we can. And I, like many of the listeners on this chat, I'm sure are embracing that same ethos as it relates to their own companies or working with businesses, because it is what we did learn is is definitely not going to cut it.
No, onward. So I'm afraid that we're going to have to leave it there for now, Tony. And we're just about we're out of time. And I so much appreciate you taking the time today. And so many thanks to Tony Karman, EXPO, the director of EXPO Chicago, for taking the time to join us. And thanks to all of you who have logged in, have taken the interest in our market and an interest in these very interesting developments. Please be sure to visit yieldstreet.com to learn more about our offerings. Be well, and we hope that you will join us again next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.